So we want to say good afternoon to Peter. Well, actually, good morning to Peter in the US, and good afternoon to our attendees, and good evening to Heidi in Australia. So just thank you so much for joining us again this year, Peter, at Learn Free. We've had you speak before last year, and you know, you're very involved with the Aero conference. I have to confess that I don't remember all of your bio. So I'm actually going to let you tell everybody about yourself and what you do, and then you can just go for it and share what you need to share today. So thank you so much. I'm going to take myself out of here.
Well, thank you very much. And hello, everybody. Hello from the USA. I'm here in the Northeast. So we are experiencing some interesting weather fluctuations over the last week or so, which is one of the benefits of living in the Northeast of the USA. So thank you so much for having me back. And I'm really looking forward to the opportunity here to chat with everybody. Really quick about me, so we don't eat into too much time. I have been an educator really pretty much, most of my adult life. I have a doctorate in educational leadership. I started out as a public school teacher in New York City. And from there, I kind of realized that there were some other opportunities out there, and there were other ways to do this. And then got involved with Aero, which is the Alternative Education Resource Organization. I've been involved with Aero now for well over 15 years. I'm not even sure how long anymore because it's been a while. And really, Aero's mission is to bring learner-directed educational alternatives to everyone. I mean, that's kind of it in a nutshell. So in my background, I've done lots of different things. I've been, when I say with air quotes, school administrator, because, as administrator in schools where we all made decisions together and I just signed the papers kind of because the state said someone needed to sign the papers. And I actually have a background in mental health. I'm a certified counselor, and so do a lot of kind of various different things. And today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the education revolution, which is something that we talk a lot about in Aero, but I think it's really more of an idea. And am I able to share my screen here?
There, I've set it now.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let me just bring this up for all of you. And as I'm doing that, just this is really more of a discussion than a presentation. So please feel free to, put any questions or comments in the chat box, or, just go ahead and unmute yourself. We can do that as well. I promise I will be mindful of that. Can you all see my screen here? Hold on. Can you see my screen?
We saw it a minute ago, but I don't know.
Yeah, I can't see at the moment, Peter.
Okay. All right. Let me try.
That's it now. Yeah, there we go.
Great. And it's just, again, just a few slides here, just as a backdrop to what we're going to discuss. Again, please feel free, questions, comments. I'd really love to hear what's going on in your experience, what you're experiencing, what you're seeing. Because as we were talking about just before we started, before we officially kicked this off, we're in this time of transformation, and I think with everything. I don't think it's just with education. I think we're really at a crossroads of deciding how humanity is going to be. I mean, I think we really have that. And I'll speak a little bit for, here in the States, that there's such this, I don't know, this divide of everything. Everything now is divided across political lines. And I'm talking about even simple things, like even talking about artificial intelligence now is somehow politicized. Like if you think, wait, maybe we should think about this, then automatically you're in a certain camp. And so I think we're seeing that in a lot of different areas of society, not just education. So education revolution, and again, it's kind of a phrase that Arrow uses a lot. And I think what we talk about here is, and I wanted to kind of just take a second to talk about, sometimes when people hear revolution, it can have a negative kind of connotation to it, like it's a violent overthrow, and it's and it's this kind of I don't know, sometimes these images that we have of a revolution is not always positive. And for me, I really want to take a step back from that and say, when we're talking about an education revolution, it's really about creating opportunities that are outside the conventional system. And we were talking a little bit, again, before we kind of officially kicked this off, about the system. And I don't know about all the educational systems around the globe, but I know of a lot of them, and I know a lot of them are really kind of designed in the same way. And then anytime you have a large system like that, it's very resistant to change. It's just like ecological systems, right? And a very stable ecological system will be able to honestly be able to adapt to change and almost kind of engulf a change, where the educational system, especially here in the States, is really able to kind of, in a way, fight off any sort of innovation, right? And in some sense, I think a lot of people that are working within the system are not really trying to do that. They're not trying to purposely not be innovative or not be learner directed, or but it's the system itself that really creates that. So it's like you're kind of living in the system that is very kind of self-organizing and will kind of reorganize to protect itself in a way. So we talk a lot about that, but really the education revolution is about creating opportunities outside the system. And so what you have is these opportunities. Look, for some students, probably a very small percentage, this conventional system actually provides them with some opportunities, and they actually can they can do well in the system, and they're okay with it. So so toppling the system maybe isn't really the place we want to put our energies into, but it's creating other things. It's creating opportunities outside of that. And the more opportunities that are created, the more people that homeschool, the more people that can show evidence, right? Can say, look, this works. We've been doing this for millennia, really, right? But this really works. And the more we can do that, the more we're going to create these other opportunities and create systems of change. And we'll talk about, where youth come in that in a second. I just want to, because I can't see the chat box, so I'm just going to kind of diminish this for a second. Just want to make sure there aren't any questions or comments that I'm missing.
You can pop the chat out as well. You can make it pop out so it's its own separate thingy.
Okay, yeah, let me do that. Okay, all right. I don't see any, so that's good. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. And again, please feel free to, if you need to unmute and you need to do anything like that, please go ahead and do that. All right. So I wanted to know what your truth bomb is about the conventional system. And again, we're about the truth bomb, right? So so feel free to, just go for it.
I'm thinking.
Yeah, I'm thinking. Hi, I'm Sinead.
Hi.
Hi. I'm thinking that maybe we can take a step back even further than that, which you have alluded to, in terms of where does society want to go? Because there's a lot of interaction between families who home educate and families whose kids go to school. And so it's not, I guess I'm thinking it may not be such a huge truth bomb for people outside of a system to then be able to influence that system in a good way. I agree with you that there's with the system, when you just have that many kids in one place that you're responsible for, there's a nature of the beast kind of factor going on. And that's nobody's fault. That's not anything to do with the teachers, as you also said, or the people leading the schools, or even the governments and their policies. I think it's just a nature of the beast of scale, really. But that doesn't mean that as people outside of that system, we can't then influence with the best practice that comes out of what we do, because not everything we do works either. You know, we're trying things out, especially because we do tend to push boundaries and try new things. That I guess it's an anti-truth bomb, really, that there's a capacity for us as a home educating community to really share positivity and good results of what we're doing that might be able to be fed into the system, maybe in a bit of a different way because of the lack of flexibility that there is in a system, but still in a really positive way. And I think that's exciting.
Don't you wish they would consult us, though, Sinead, because we can bring those perspectives, because I actually believe home educators are on the cutting edge of understanding how children learn, because we're dealing with our own very specific situations in our own, you know, specific needs of specific children on such a, I don't know, almost macro level that, you know, we understand things about learning that they can't ever grasp in a school. And one of the things, I was in a bit of a conversation on Facebook the other day where somebody was saying, yes, but it was about registration of home educated kids. And they were saying, yes, but we need to make sure every child gets the education they deserve. And I answered him and I said, well, if every child got the education they deserved, they wouldn't be leaving school. There's a reason children are leaving schools, because that's my truth bomb, is that the education system can't possibly deliver what it claims it can deliver.
I do think that it would be good if they would consult us, but I think that will only come when they see the proof of the pudding, if you like. I don't know that that's something that we need to aim for specifically as a community. If we just aim for being the best we can be, then it will become evident. And it is, I think, becoming evident because so many people are moving over to home education compared to when I first started, which was around the same time as you, I think, Juliet. The popularity of it is going to speak volumes. And so it may not be an immediate something that we can influence, but I think it will influence just because of its success.
Yeah, one can only hope. So far they're ignoring all the positive stories we're sharing, but yes.
Well, it takes a long time. Like, I mean, Peter mentioned that, didn't he? It takes a long time to influence the system. So our generation probably won't. But well, I don't know that we won't, but we're part of generations and generations and generations that will influence the system potentially, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right, Sinead. It's that thing over time. It's that the analogy of turning a steamliner, and that it's it takes time, but I think it will influence. And kind of when you see all of the different alternative provisions, so home education is one of the main streams, and then you've got lots of different lots of different alternatives that are popping up, doing things in a different way. And I totally agree with you. It's that level of scale, isn't it? Because there will always, I think there will always be a need for kind of mass education, but it's how what it looks like, because not everyone can. That's another discussion, can home educate, but where it's not possible, it kind of feels, and we all know that the conventional system is stuck in the past, and it's kind of not really preparing young people for the 21st century. I'm really interested. My daughter's part of a kind of an alternative school, which is looking at, it's problems based and passion based rather than like academic structured, subject based, and just seeing how that is she'll be in a far better position to take on the 21st century, because she's used all these different things to do projects, to do micro internships and all this sort of stuff. It's that more individualized thing. So it's kind of how we move from that set in the box, no, this is the way it does to that. And I think you're right. I think over time, home education and alternative education will start speaking into it. But I think you're right as well, Juliet, that that's a bit of a challenge to the government and to the system. So it's whether they want to listen. But maybe it'll get to the point where there's no one in schools anymore. But anyway.
Yeah, that's thank you everyone for that. I just want to make sure if anyone else has something that they would like to add, that you have an opportunity to do so.
Yeah, Leal has her hand up.
Yeah, if that's okay, if there's still time. I wanted to just say that in the short amount of time that we've explored home education here in the UK, the people around us have noticed already the mental health like capacity that the kids have become. They've just become more happier, healthier, and more confident in speaking to children and adults of all sorts. Sorry about that. Got an energetic one in the corner, but anyways, yeah, even that, like having the freedom to be themselves. And I think that's really been a positive influence to those that are in the conventional system within our community. So that's one positive thing, I suppose, especially with the schools now that they're trying to raise that mental health awareness in the kids and in teachers. But it's like, hey, actually, if you school them, take them out of school and home educate them, that's where the true revolution begins, is at your home and with your own family and, a home education community.
I do agree with that, but also I think, and I've heard this point expressed by a lot of people recently, but just a little tiny caveat to that is we've always home educated our kids, but we have had some mental health problems. Sometimes they're not to do with environment, they might be genetic, and so have to be a little bit careful, because there will be evidence at some point that home educated kids can struggle with mental health as well. And so yeah, we don't want to stick our heads above a parapet to be shot down, if you know what I mean. But yeah, in general, I do totally agree with you.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, because one of the things that even in like I said, I have a background in mental health, and I think as a mental health practitioner, yeah, I mean, schooling or education, if you think about it, for young people, they spend a lot of time doing that, especially in the conventional system. They spend a really, really long time. They spend 5 to 6 hours, sometimes longer, for 5 days a week. So that's a big chunk of their lives that they're doing that. But on the other hand, right, there are other factors that will absolutely impact mental health and don't really have that much to do with school and how they're educated. So I think I think that's important to be a little careful and cautious about, what we're saying, right, is going on, and what we could actually do in terms of alternative, education, homeschooling. Doesn't matter really what the alternative is, but it's really about understanding that, yeah, actually, Arrow, we actually conducted a survey with our members, and one of the things we asked, I mean, I forget how many questions now, but we're actually going to do it again soon because we want to get some more data. So it was basically about asking, so, when students came to you, what were they experiencing? Are they experiencing anything different? Do you have people on staff who are, trained in, mental health, anything really to do with mental health? Are you connected with community resources, things like that. And what really came out of that is that, yeah, while, a lot of alternatives did see an uptick in positive mental health in terms of, what the student came from to what they're experiencing, there were also things that, there were places where that didn't happen. And there were, places where maybe it was just kind of a flat line, like where it just kind of stood the same, or surprisingly, sometimes the other way, in terms of now that the student felt safe and comfortable, there was some things that started to emerge, because now it's like, well, actually, I can talk about the things that are going on, and I can, reveal what's happening. And so some of those things came out as well. And I see that there's a comment in the chat. So let me just see if I can, not sure why I can see that there's something in it, but I can't see the chat. Hold on.
Leal was saying that her kids who had mental health needs didn't get the support in school. So that was one of the biggest reasons they decided to home educate, so they could customize their learning. And I think that is an important thing, is also, if you do have a child with mental health issues, you know, how would they have been in school with those mental health issues, you know, and would
I
it
was going to
actually
say
be
that.
much
I
worse
think
for
mine
them?
would have been worse and probably would have come out a lot sooner had they been in school. But yeah, I can't know that, but that's what I think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The-
and I think I know for you know, I'll speak for here in the States, is that there's a lot of money being spent and a lot of time being spent in terms of schools really trying to provide those services. But I think that's the thing. How much do you put on the schools? You know, again, that's kind of like, what do you, and I imagine you're all familiar with one of our politicians here, Bernie Sanders, who talks about schools as community centers, you know. And actually a lot of, believe it or not, a lot of the schools here, the public schools here that we call them public schools here, function as community centers. I mean, students get fed there, they get 3 meals a day. Sometimes their parents can come and get fed, you know, so they function as community centers. And so there's opportunity there, I think. But again, there's always the debate of, well, how much do you put on the schools? You know, a school is supposed to do these things, not necessarily do the mental health piece. However, right, you're also, still here in the States, it's compulsory schooling, and you have to show, right? If you're not showing up to school, you have to provide some kind of documentation, whatever it is, to at least alert, okay, the student is being homeschooled, or they're going here, or whatever the case is. So the debate is, well, if you're then making it compulsory and you're saying, well, you have to be there, or you have to show that you have another thing in place, then you better be providing all these services. And I think it's a tough one, because I think there's a lot of, you know, legitimate arguments for both sides to say, well, are schools really supposed to do that? And then there's the other side, well, yes, because you're basically making it mandatory that, you know, youth have to show up. Again, I'm not sure why I can't see the chat. I can see there's more things.
There's no new ones, but I wanted to add to that, is that, you know, in the UK, certainly, I think the schools are in crisis. The education system is in crisis. UK children or teenagers specifically are considered amongst the least happy, certainly in Europe. That's a report done by the Good Childhood Report. And, you know, when I was growing up, the terms mental health and childhood just didn't go in the same sentence together, you know. And I think we've got a lot to answer for in respect of how we are robbing children of childhood and opportunity to play, opportunities for being alone with their thoughts, and all of those kinds of things, so to develop imagination and so on. And you do wonder, you know, how many children are being diagnosed with special educational needs simply because they don't fit in the system. They may be not emotionally ready for what's being taught and the way it's being taught. And then they're sort of forced to comply with something which doesn't work for them. If they just had more time, maybe they would adapt better. And what is that costing? To kind of put all these systems in place to support children who are actually being damaged by the system along the way.
Yeah, and again, so much of that, I think, is part of what I want to talk a little bit about today, is, you know, this idea of being youth led. And, you know, why is it, you know, the education revolution, the idea is that, you know, being youth led. And I think a lot of what we're talking about, so we talked about agency, we talked about self-determination, this idea of self-direction, knowing who you are, being taken seriously, you know, being able to contribute meaningfully to, you know, your community, your society, your surroundings. And you know, I talk about these things a lot, so I get a lot of questions from, and probably not from this group, but from other groups who are like, well, are you telling me that a 4-year-old child can blah, 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 blah? And I'm like, yes, they can, right? You know, they can do those things, and they do have agency, and they have their own thoughts, and they have their own. Now, am I suggesting that a 4-year-old is allowed to quote unquote roam the streets without an adult being around to at least understand what's going on and be there? No, that's not what I'm suggesting. But I am suggesting that, you know, there's a self-directed idea here, and there's an idea where youth really can be at the forefront. And what I'm talking about an education revolution in that sense is, and all of you were talking about it, is, you know, gathering that evidence, watching the child. I mean, Maria Montessori, one of the things that she would say over and over, right? The mantra, follow the child, you know, follow the child. And, you know, whether people are, you know, think well of Montessori or not, I think that idea though is really important. Follow the child. And I think if we can do that, and we talked about, you know, legislators and government and all of that. And I think, you know, going back, really just kind of a quick kind of sidebar here, connecting to what we were talking about earlier, the educational system, at least the one here in the States, was really fashioned after the old Prussian system. And it was not designed for self-direction or individualization or any. So it's, in a sense, it's doing what it was designed to do. It was never really designed for what we're talking about, you know, this liberating kind of education, this, you know, humanistic, this heart-centered, you know, again, self-determination, but also self-knowledge, knowing who you are, what kind of learner you are, what kind of things do you like, what, you know, and the system was never designed for that. And, you know, I know that this is common for schools, you know, all over the world, is that you can look at schools and you can look at prisons, and sometimes you can't tell the difference. They're structured in the same way.
Yeah.
They're laid out in the same way. They're even built with the same materials, right? So even that, so I guess really the point is that the system was never really designed for what we're talking about. So we're kind of, you know, when we're creating these other alternatives, what we're doing is creating that with these things in mind. So that's going to support the things that we're talking about. The conventional system, it's been so hard to change because again, it's really not designed for that. Now, are there places where that does happen? Absolutely. And I want to give credit to those places that do that, because there are places that do that. I think some of you might be familiar with Derry Hannum. He does some things for Arrow, but I know he's retired, but I know he was, and I forget what you all call it there, but he was kind of one of the people from the state that would go around and make sure schools were complying, I guess.
Yeah, well, we have Ofsted here.
Right. So yes,
Yeah.
so that's and I think through that he realized what, you know, he was kind of really talking about the things that we're talking about, was really pushing for those things. And he really tries to work within the system to say, hey, you know, you can do self-direction within this system. And anyway, I mean, I can connect any of you with him if you're interested in talking with him. But so really this idea of youth at the forefront, and they are leading the creation of these educational opportunities. And they're making the decisions, and they're also working through the outcomes of those decisions, right? So I think sometimes what I've seen is that, you know, and we're all well-meaning, and adults say, okay, yeah, you know, let the youth make the decisions, and they make the decisions. And then when things maybe aren't going as planned, adults kind of swoop in to sort of rescue that. And it's, again, all well-meaning. And yes, I would say there are times when adults do need to step in, and I would say, but that's a very small bandwidth. Like, obviously, if it's really dangerous, unlawful, right? And, you know, I would say really those are the two big ones, right? Where it's dangerous or unlawful. And then it's like, okay, wait, you know, let's kind of back up here. But otherwise, I think it's really about letting, you know, young people, youth, work through those outcomes. Like, hey, we wanted to do this model, and it's kind of not working, or it's not going the way we want, you know, that's the process, right? That's the whole thing about learning and being self-directed. And then, like I say here on the bottom, you know, adults are in a support role. So I want to be clear. I don't mean that adults don't have anything to do with this, or adults never have a good idea, or adults should never be consulted, but it's really more in that support role. And then what I put here is like, so why do we want a youth-led, you know, education revolution? I mean, what's, you know, what's the deal with that, basically? Well, revolutions, as we know, are often led by youth, right? We can look at some, you know, a lot of revolutions, the successful ones, you know, have been led by youth. And like we've all been talking about, you know, education really primarily impacts youth. So it's, if you think about it, and so when I say education, I know that's a really broad term, and we're all still, you know, going through our own education, and we're all still learners, and we're all still doing that. But when I say education, I mean in terms of what we're looking at for youth, and when we come up with any of these policies or legislation, or, you know, even ideas, thoughts, it impacts youth, and sometimes we forget to ask them, what do you think? You know, I've been in a room with youth where, you know, I was talking about self-direction, and I was talking about all that, and you know, and we're having a great discussion, and then, you know, there's always some youth in the crowd that say, you know, no one ever asked me what I wanted, and maybe I don't want to be self-directed all the time. You know, maybe I need this, or maybe I want, you know, and so it's interesting. I think even in the alternative education world, we forget that sometimes. You know, adults are like, yeah, you know, we need to do, you know, self-directed education or Montessori or whatever it is. And we don't ask the youth, right? We don't ask them. And I think sometimes we just forget to do it. It's not because we don't want to, we just forget, you know, we're like, oh, we have this great idea. And it's like, well, where are the youth? What do they have to say? And I think we would all agree with this. Youth look at the world in a way that, you know, adults sometimes don't or can't. You know, we've been through, I mean, we all have our own experiences. You know, we're at a different place in our lives. You know, we look at the world in a different way, and we're impacted by the things going on in the world. But youth are really more impacted because they're going to have to, you know, work through this for far longer than we are. And like we were talking about artificial intelligence a little earlier. And I talk to youth all the time about that because they are so much more connected, right, with technology and things. And so it's interesting to hear what they have to say, because they don't look, I think they look at it really differently because they're more used to it. It's more an extension of who they are. That doesn't mean they can't see some of the concerns maybe about it, but it's anyway. So that's the idea of you know, why being youth-led, you know, is important. And so, you know, kind of getting back to what we've been talking about a little bit. So, you know, what kind of a revolution? And so I put up there, right? It's a good question to ask youth. But we talked, and I say maybe, right, with some of these things that we've been talking about. So I want to pause there because I do want to hear more from all of you and what your thoughts are, what your experiences have been around this. And I know, you know, we've been talking a little bit about that, but, you know, what are some things that you're seeing in terms of, hey, this is, you know, this is really starting to take hold and people are really understanding that something needs to be different. And I would say here in the States, I think we have this push-pull. I think people are seeing that, but the system in a way is a magnet, right? It's kind of pulling, like students are now, the young people are now going back to the conventional system because of a lot of factors. But I would just say it's happening now. They haven't completely recovered to pre-COVID numbers, but it's slowly starting to creep back up.
I think just in terms of what I've been observing in the UK, in terms of my youngest is 17, so but looking at the home educators coming up behind us, if you like, chronologically, there's a lot more confidence in people to individualize and be very child focused in their home education. Whereas when I started, there were a lot more folks who were not deschooled themselves. And I probably was one of them at the beginning, who felt that we did take a Montessori approach to start off with, actually, but I guess I wanted that structure for me to feel confident that I was doing something that was good for my children, because that's what I've been used to, some kind of structure. And what I'm observing now is there's a lot more confidence in home educators with young children to be different, to not have to replicate school in any way. And I think some of them still do, and that's fine, because I agree with you that actually some kids, they like a scaffolding around them and around their learning. But yeah, it's great and exciting to see that there's so many more of them as well, and that confidence is then becoming this upward spiral, that they are encouraging each other to, yeah, you can do it that way, because this doesn't work for your child. It might work for my child, but it doesn't work for yours. And I think it's definitely moving in this kind of direction. All the things that you're talking about here, I see coming up in the home education world in the UK.
Yeah, that's great. And that often does happen, where it's the adult that needs to feel comfortable, right? It's so if you watch young children, they don't need any right, like if they're going to learn and they're going to play and all that, they basically figure it out. And it's really the adult. And I think really, if we want to dig a little deeper on that, it's really the adult, because it's like, who's going to judge me, right? Who's over me saying, wait, what are you doing? How could you be doing that? And it's almost that. And I think when one of the bullet points I have here is free from standardization. So again, it's not the idea that nobody's accountable, or you don't ask youth to like kind of demonstrate if they know something, or be able to show you that they know something, and it's not that, but it's more about how are you going to be judged, or how are you going to be looked at. And I think that's in the adult world, we have so much of that. So that's a lot of where that comes from. It's that whatever it is we have in our head, someone's going to judge, what this is looking like. And kids, especially young kids, they don't care about that. Right? They really don't. I mean, they're going to do what they're going to do. And they're not even thinking about that. It doesn't even come into their thought, necessarily. So I think we have that. And I think, again, what I'm talking about here, equitable and accessible. And I think it was right before we kicked this off, we were talking a little bit about how maybe not everyone can do homeschooling. And maybe not everyone can do even any alternative model, because in some ways, some alternative models requires parents to, be around more, let's just say, right? Let's just put it, or be able to spend more time, than maybe they have. And what I mean is that, parents going to work and things like that. So sometimes work schedules don't always line up with, a schedule from an alternative educational opportunity. So what do you do then, and how does that look? But again, I think it's really about, so asking youth in these places, right? What kind of thing do you want? What are some things that you want to see? How does this work? What does this feel like for you? Do you feel like you're spending your time well? It's one of the things I always try to ask you: do you feel like you're spending your time well? Do you feel like you're getting something from this? And if not, then why? What can we do? What can we do to to make that different? And I think to me, that's always an important question, because I want to know if they feel like they are, and if they're not, well, then what's the disconnect there? So yeah, I think we were definitely we're definitely moving in a direction where these types of things are being trusted. And what I would say, what I really want to see even that shift even more is to trusting youth, trusting them to, and look, as adults, sometimes we're going to hear an idea from, a young person where we're going to be like, yeah, that's not going to work. Right? Because, we've been there, we've done it, and we can see, right. We can sometimes see a little further down the road than, say what, teenagers and, and adolescents. Sometimes they're very kind of immediate, right? Like what's kind of the immediate as opposed to, what's going to happen a year from now. And I think that's okay to be, and if you're asked, say, hey, what do you think? You can be honest and say, I'm not really sure if this is going to work because of these things, but let's see, because sometimes we're wrong too, sometimes we don't, sometimes we think things and it doesn't happen. And so I'd like to see that even, that shift to continue to more trusting kids, right? Trusting youth to really, figure this out and not to look at them in that, well, if you give them, I'm sure you've all heard this, right? If you give them freedom, all they're going to do is sit around all day. Well, maybe one day they'll do that. And maybe they'll do that for a couple of months even, right? And I've seen that where you have a student from the conventional system, they come into an alternative and it's a self-directed alternative. And the idea is, okay, you're not going to be forced or told or anything. And sometimes it takes them, it's that process of deschooling in a sense, right? It's like, wait, you're not going to tell me what to do. What do I do? It's kind of like, I give this example a lot where you're sitting around a table when you're playing cards and you don't do anything until the dealer gives you a card. And so that's kind of how they are, right? It's like, wait, you didn't give me my card yet. What am I supposed to do? Right. And so sometimes it takes, there's a transition time. I've seen it take a year where, and not that they didn't do anything for a year. I don't want to misrepresent what happened, but it was a struggle. And then after that year, it was less of a struggle. And it was, and then it was like, oh, I can do these things. And so sometimes it really takes some time to undo that idea. I still think it's important. And I still think that, it transitioning to that, I think is really where this kind of revolution that we're talking about, is going to happen. And so some of the things we were just saying, like, how do you do it? And you kind of just let the youth lead and they're going to be innovative, and they, again, they're going to come up with these things that we may not ever think of, or we may be reluctant to think of or to try, because again, we've been down a lot of these roads. And then we were just talking about the trust and support and supporting organizations and events like this that, we're doing today, and that you've been doing for the last few days. And just, I think to support the people that are doing the work too. And that's youth and adults and everybody that's involved. I think it's really, really important to do that. And sometimes, and we talked about it, the support is not always just agreeing either, right? It's not always just saying, oh yeah, it's like, wait a minute, and talking about some of the limitations of even, we talk about an alternative education. Look, there are these limitations. And I can tell you one of the limitations that a lot of alternatives, here in the States are experiencing, and I would say throughout the world too, is sustainability. How do you sustain this? How do you keep it going? And financially and all of that, right? So there's that. So I think, there's that kind of discussion, those important discussions, and really action that needs to happen. I can just tell you real quick sidebar here for Arrow, for many, Arrow's been around for a long time, and for many years, and we still do this, where, we may get some people who want to give us money. I'm just going to be frank about it. And we've said no, because their values don't necessarily align with ours. And, we're starting to realize that we have to be a little more open to say, wait, okay, so when we say your values don't align with ours, is it like, if they're completely polar opposites, obviously that's a hard no, and we're not even thinking about that. But if there's one or two things that we're not really in lockstep with, can we still work together? And we've done that in the sense of education. Right? We've done that really well, that part. It's kind of the other piece, right? The sustainability piece, where we have, like I said, entities that maybe want to support us financially, but we've been like, well, you do this thing that that's not really who we are. But what about these 7 other things that you do that do align with what we do? And so that's a hard discussion. And I'm not saying we even have a real answer to that, to be honest, because we don't. But I think it's important to do those things. So I'm going to stop. I've talked a lot. I see some other things in the chat. So
yeah, Peter. So Leo has asked, how do you gauge the balance between student-led direction and parent-led direction? So I'll repeat that. How do you gauge the balance between student-led direction and parent-led direction?
Yeah. And that is an excellent question. And I think you have to really look at, okay, so first of all, where are the ideas being generated and how are they being generated? So, and I can give you an example. I've done this where I've walked into a room with teenagers and I said, okay, I'm going to be back in 2 hours. And you're going to tell me about your ideas. Right? If you want to, it's voluntary. If you don't want to be part of this, you cannot be part of this. But you're here because you said you wanted to be part of it. But let's say you decide right now that you don't want to do this, that's fine. But if you want to, I'm going to be back in 2 hours, right? Sometimes it's an hour, it depends. And I think so sometimes it's looking at that. What is the actual process? So sometimes when you see, the gauging the balance, I would say if you really want something to be youth-led, you have to let it be youth-led. And I think you can tell, right? When I'm not saying adults can't be in the room. Adults can be in the room. The reason why I tend to remove myself from things like that is because I can be quiet, but honestly, I cannot say a word and I can just sit there, and I've done that too. But I find it that even when I'm in the room, you start looking to me, right? If there's a question, if there's something, they start to look in my direction, and then, you got to put your head down. You got to like pretend you're not listening, whatever. But I think there's that, right? There's that process where I think, how does it even begin? How does it start? Now, that doesn't mean adults can't pose questions. That doesn't mean adults can't provide space. You can do that. But again, these youth-led ideas, really, okay, these are, ideas that are coming from youth. These are, actions that youth can take. Now, when I said the support role, so what adults can then do is to say, okay, here's these ideas, and talk to the youth. Okay, who do you need help with X? Okay, is there somebody you have in mind to be able to help you with that? That kind of thing. And then you can, so the balance is where an adult comes in to kind of get more to the logistics, I think, and more to kind of like, okay, how do we put this into action? And then it's really about, again, youth being there at the forefront of this, and that they have to work through the outcomes like we were talking about. So in terms of like a percentage, I think it's hard to say, but I think I don't know that there's a balance, to be honest. I think it's more about, if it's going to be youth-led, it's going to be youth-led. And once you start seeing adults, intervening and, shooting down ideas, or, kind of almost honestly really taking over the process, then it's no longer youth-led, right? That's adult-led. And there's places for that. That doesn't mean you can't have adult-led in some, but I don't always know that there is a balance, right? And I think if something's going to be youth-led, it has to be youth-led. Now, if you're talking about an organizational wide thing, and I don't know, and maybe that was your question, I'm sorry if I didn't answer it right, but But I think, and from an organizational perspective, I think you can look at, you know, there's youth led and there's adult led, but there's also the spaces where those things come together. And how do you balance that as a sense? Well, okay, you know, we're moving in a direction, and the youth, you know, youth are saying this is the direction we need to go in. Adults are saying this is the direction we need to go in. You know, where do we find the common ground? And I think for an organization, and I would say as Arrow, we really try to do that, try to be intergenerational and really try to, you know, be responsive to those things. But I can tell you that in, how do I say, like the balance, I think, is interesting. It's an interesting question, because if you're going to be youth led, then it really has to be the balance, right? You have to have, you know, really more, right, in the youth led side, right? So the percentage has to be really high, like 85-90% has to be youth led. All right, let me see here.
Yeah, Sinead's got some really good observations and comments, Sinead, kind of around that balance. About how do we know when children, when young people are ready for that level of responsibility, or do we only know when they're in it? I guess I think that is, could be paraphrasing your question badly, Sinead. And also, it's also how do we encourage that? Because there is wisdom that people who've been through experience have got. How does that work as well as when in youth led situations?
Yeah, and it's so interesting, because this comes up all the time, and this comes up even in, you know, Arrow and other places, you know, helping to start educational alternatives. And, you know, as people that have done that, and as you have all done this process, you know, you have a lot of wisdom and you have a lot of experience, and it's sometimes so difficult to sit back and not say this one thing that, you know, might save months of work, right? Or might save a situation that a challenging situation. You might save some people from that. I think you have to decide, though, what is the outcome. So, and let me back up. So the process leading to the outcome, because I can tell you about things, but unless you experience it for yourself, what you take from it is different. You know, and we've all heard that term, right? The hot stove, right? You know, you touch a hot stove, now, you know, like someone says hot, you know what that means. And so I think there has to be that kind of, honestly, like, to really figure out for yourself and the organization or whatever, like what's really the end goal. You know, do you want to, okay, I'm going to impart my wisdom, and that's really helpful, and those are all really important, but do you want them to experience this process on their own? Because that really, to me, is where then they come out of, and then I think your wisdom is going to land a little differently when you have those conversations and those discussions. And they may even say to you, how come you didn't tell me? You know, well, here's why. Now, again, there are exceptions, you know, dangerous, unlawful, you know, all of that. Yes, I think we can all agree on those. But I would say, you know, allow the process to happen. In terms of when youth are ready, sometimes they'll ask, right? They'll ask for it. They'll ask for the responsibility. They'll start to talk about it. They'll start to give ideas. And, you know, the example that I gave, okay, I'm in a room and then I walk out. Well, they were showing up for a reason, right? I didn't just like pull them, right? And hey, you're coming, right? Like it, and I shouldn't say, there was a small part of that happened, right? But they were there because they wanted to be. So I think, again, you know, if they're showing up and they're asking for certain things, it's like, I'm sure you've all heard this, right? If a student says, hey, I want to play guitar, and they ask once, well, maybe, you know, all right, we'll see, you know, if you ask again, you know, if they're saying, no, I really want to learn how to play guitar, I really want to learn how to play guitar, and then you see, and they're gravitating towards those things, I think that's how you know, right? And you all have obviously your own wisdom and your own experiences, and you have to trust your gut sometimes. And sometimes you can just ask them, you know, are you interested in this? Here's what we can't, you know, we think there's some needs here, and you all are talking about the needs. Are you interested in doing something like this? And And so I think there's a kind of an organic process too that all of you, I'm sure, right? I mean, doing this, you understand when things are like, okay, now we need to kind of go to this, or now we can start having conversations about these different things. Did I explain that well?
Yeah, you did. Yeah,
Okay.
it's interesting because I think I'm thinking about, I guess I'm just talking about my kids personally, and obviously there are different personality traits that play into this. If they'd been doing some kind of project or they had some kind of goal, and I totally agree with you. And I was thinking, as soon as you said it, I was at the same time in my mind thinking, it depends on the goal. If the goal is to let them have the experience of doing a self-led project, then absolutely, I think not interjecting unless they come to you to widen their knowledge base, because that's part of their choice in their project. But if that wasn't the goal in a project, but they've just said, I'm really interested in, and they were doing a project in that way, just being self-led, I guess, without that specific goal. And I had not told them something that would have saved them trouble along the way, they would not have been happy with that. Because I guess where I'm coming from is you flip it on the other side, and both of my comments, I guess, were related to the same kind of thing, that there's a way that kids can feel just thrown in the deep end without any help. And it's differentiating that, which we don't want, from that youth-led innovation. And I think Heidi was talking about it earlier in the week about giving the kids opportunities to do things themselves and make mistakes and work through those outcomes that you mentioned earlier, which will in the end grow their confidence, because they'll say, okay, that didn't work, but I got out of it. I guess that's where I'm talking about the balance. And I think questions is a really helpful way to breach that gap. So you can say to them, you're going through such and such. What do you think about this? And then let them think about it. And there are times where we might have said to our kids, well, I had a similar experience and this is what happened. I'm not saying that's going to happen for you, but something to think about. And in that way, you're not taking the reins, but you're also not leaving them without, just throwing them in the deep end and say sink or swim, when you could help them with something or help them avoid something. But if they then turn around and say, no, I'm going to do it this way because I think it will work. Well, I totally agree with you. I was shocked from so small, the thoughts that my kids had and the alternative ways of looking at things from preschool, from toddler years. And I thought, wow, because I was the youngest child, so I didn't really grow up with any younger siblings. It was shocking to me how many amazing ideas they came up from super young. I thought, wow, that's really impressive. And to try and give rein to that without putting pressure on them to feel like I've got to sort this out all myself, or without them feeling, yeah, you could have helped me and you didn't. That wasn't kind,
Right. And I think that's a really important distinction. So I think what I am saying in terms of adults taking the reins. So if youth come to you and say, okay, I need help, right? And sometimes they do just say it just like that, right? I need help with this. Okay, what do you need help with? All right, well, I'm having trouble figuring out blah, 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 right? And so then, yes, I think if you're asked, then you can offer those things and you can say, so tell me what you're thinking, tell me how, what's your thought process? How might you go about this? And if they're saying, well, I'm thinking, these things, you can say, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? I was in a similar kind of experience once. This is what happened. I think those are totally okay, right? Those are things that, again, if you're going to be part of the process, that's part of it. I have seen adults play 20 questions with kids, and that doesn't always work either. But what do you think? What do you, and I think you can do that and say, okay, what do you think? Okay, where are you going with this? you know, I think those are okay questions, but if you keep going back to that all the time, again, it's time and place. You know, there are some things you can do that with, right? You can kind of finagle that, get them to think deeper, you know, keep asking. But when you're saying, hey, you know, you could have saved me 3 months of work, you know, again, that's where you have to make that choice, I think. Honestly, it's like, okay, so if I don't say this and you know, it cost them 3 months, but then at the end of it, they've had this experience where now if they do come back to me and say, well, how come you didn't tell me about this? You can say, you know, I really wanted you to experience this. I didn't know if this was going to happen because honestly, it could have worked. You know, what you were trying could have worked. Again, if it's, you know, illegal, if it's dangerous, those are different things. But if it's kind of like that, you know, that process where you're letting them kind of do that, again, it's that balance, right? It's like you have to strike for your own self to be able to kind of let go of that a little bit. And I've said to students, look, you know, I'm here for support. I say there are some times where I'm not going to agree with what you're doing, or there's some times where I might think it's not going to work, but I am going to let you kind of go through the process. And I think if you start there and you have those conversations, then if they do come back, you know, later and say, well, you know, you didn't tell me about this, you can say, well, this is the process, you know, this is what we're doing. Now, again, I know there's times where that can be cruel. It depends, right? There's like kind of the big kind of things where if you don't say something, it's like, really, you know, like that's, and we talked about, right, being dangerous, being unlawful, but even like, no, like no one's going to give you money for that, right? You know, that kind of thing. Like, yeah, you know, people have tried that and here, so maybe you want to look at these things. I think that's okay, right? You can do that. But it's like when adults are really kind of stepping in and stopping the process, right? So stop the learning. That's where I think it then becomes something completely different.
Yeah, like if you're in that scenario that you just mentioned, like, you know, in my experience, no one's going to give you money for that. There are different ways of saying that, aren't there? And you can still say in your support role. So you can say, well, I've noticed that such and such hasn't really attracted money. How would you get around that? How would you be different in that? And you're still then saying, you're not saying, no, that's not going to work. You're just saying, look at this part of life. How would you navigate that? And then there's still youth-led, that's still with them. And it's still enabling and it's still positive.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
I feel I feel like I'm doing a lot of talking now. Sorry.
No, that's great. I mean, this is a discussion, you know, and this is really what this is meant for. And again, you know, in terms of the education revolution, it's again, you know, talking to kids about, okay, I'm going to topple the system. Are you really? Right? Because like, you know, what, you know, and I've honestly, I've even said it, I mean, generally with older, right, with older kids, right, like teenagers and teenagers that I have relationships with, you know, that I can say, are you really, you know, like I wouldn't say that to, you know, youth that I don't really know, right? I mean, so that's part of the relationship base and the trust and all of that. But you can say, okay, look, you know, there are things that have been tried, you know, there are all these things out there. What do you think about those? You know, what's your niche, right? What are you going to do that's maybe going to be different? Or, you know, there are some challenges here. And it's, again, it's not to derail them from what they're doing. It's to kind of get them to think about it. And I think that, again, that's okay without, you know, without deterring them, without honestly, really kind of, you know, directing it in the way that, you know, adults want it to go. And I think that's the thing. And honestly, sometimes, you know, we know that they're going to fail sometimes and it's not going to work. But right there, to me, that's that is almost more important, right? How do you deal with that? How do you deal with the fact that this didn't work? What did you learn from that? You know, what did you come away with? And I don't know, to me, that I think there's that, you know, as well-meaning adults, sometimes we want to jump in and stop that from happening. but again, you have to kind of for your own self to decide where, you know, where that point is where you do need to jump in and say, hey, wait a minute, this is, you know, hold on, let's rethink this. And okay, oh man, I'm really like, I don't think this is gonna work, but I'm gonna let them do this, and you know, so they can experience it. And I don't know, like for me, I feel like that's part of the learning too. And again, through that process of, you know, maybe where the outcome isn't what they wanted, again, they're going to come away with a very different learning from that than we took away from our experience. So so I think that that's important too, you know, like that. So to look at all of that together. And I think finally I just want to, and then we can talk for a few minutes if people have some time. I think what I see in terms of all of this and all that we're coming together to talk about these important ideas is, you know, we see that there's this critical mass right now, honestly, to say something needs to be different. And, you know, we have, you know, incredible people doing incredible things, you know, whether it's homeschooling, whether it's, you know, any other alternative that's really learner directed and really about, you know, being learner directed, learner centered, and understanding that idea of what it means and being willing to deal with the tremendous upsides and also the limitations and sometimes the frustrations that are going to come with that. You know, to be able to do that kind of focused, I don't know, I think just focused action is really, and I think we're just really at a critical point where, you know, we need to get these ideas and these things that we do out in front of as many people as we possibly can. So I'm going to end there.
Great. Thank you so much, Peter, for that. One of the things, if people want to carry on this conversation with you, how do they get in contact with you? How would they, how would they carry on this chat with you?
Yeah, I'm going to put my email in the chat here. Also, as I think you can see in my background, if you can see it, we do have the Aero conference coming up June 23rd to 25th. And it's in person and online, as we were talking about, it's hybrid. So I know for some of you, you may not be able to get to the in-person portion, but we do have the online portion. There are different sessions for different things. But if you're interested, you can email me at this address, or you could just go to, I'll put it here in the chat. And a lot of these discussions will be carried on there. And you'll be hearing from youth there, youth and adults. Let me just make sure I'm putting that in correctly, because the chat is kind of small on my end here. And again, thank you all for giving me this opportunity. I enjoyed last year when I did this. I enjoyed this year. Hopefully one year I can get out there in person.
That'd be amazing.
Yeah,
That'd be great.
I'd really love to be out there in person. So yeah, please feel free, contact me. You know, really anytime. I'm usually really good via email, getting back to people. And if you want to know more about the conference or just chat or just, you know, share some ideas, I would love to know what's going on for all of you. So one of the things that Aero tries to do is to really encompass these stories and to share them with people, you know, through various means that we do that. But, you know, we love to hear from people. Hey, you know, I just started this new homeschool group, or hey, in this homeschool group, this is what's happening, or hey, I'm homeschooling my 3 children or my 1 child, and this is what we're experiencing. You know, we just love to share those ideas with people, because like I said at the end there, I mean, this is so important to get these out there. And to me, the revolution, as most revolutions do, really are going to come from outside the system, right, and not from inside. So I think the work that we're doing is really, you know, moving that forward. So yeah, thank you all so much for being here and giving me some time today. And I know it's kind of getting later in the afternoon for all of you there. So
very happy to go over to hear you speak, Peter. It's great. It's great to hear from you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other comments from anyone else before we finish? No, fantastic. Well, thank you so much again, Peter. Really appreciate your time and what you're doing, and for your encouragement and inspiration for this sort of thing. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you in person next year, or touch base between then.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you all, everybody. Have a great evening.
Yeah, have a
Lovely
great
to
day.
meet
See you
you.
soon.
Thank you,
All right,
Peter.
bye-bye.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.